In the heart of a sprawling metropolis, amid the symphony of honking cars and bustling crowds, stood Eleanor, sheltering under the neon glow of a subway station sign. The evening had unfolded with the usual pace of city life, but as she checked her watch, a vintage piece she'd inherited from her grandmother, she realized the hour had crept perilously close to midnight. It was the time for the last train home. The sky, a murky canvas of dark clouds, had begun to weep softly, its droplets drumming a steady rhythm on the pavement. Eleanor could see the cozy lights of a nearby cafe, its windows fogged from the warmth within, promising a refuge from the inclement weather. The decision tugged at her, a comforting coffee and the shelter of the cafe, or the steel serpent of the subway that could carry her swiftly home. As the rain intensified, so did her resolve. Turning her back to the cafe, she descended into the cavernous depths of the station. The scent of rain mingled with the earthy aroma of the underground, a smell unique to places forgotten by the sun. The platform was nearly deserted, save for a few stray souls who, like her, had ventured to catch the final ride home. The train, when it arrived, was an old model, its sides graffiti-tagged with the stories of the city. It hissed a steamy sigh as the doors slid open, inviting her inside. Eleanor stepped into a nearly empty compartment, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting an eerie glow. Seated at the far end was an old man, his face etched with the lines of many years, and his eyes reflecting a quiet sort of wisdom. Beside him lay a suitcase, battered and worn, stickers from distant lands plastering its surface. Choosing a seat across from him, Eleanor settled in, her thoughts adrift on the rhythmic clacking of the train. The old man glanced up, his gaze both curious and kind, and with the train tunneling through the darkness outside, he began to speak. His voice was soft, yet clear, carrying stories of distant places and times, a life painted in strokes of adventure and love. Eleanor listened, captivated. The train's steady rhythm became a backdrop to tales of sunlit streets in Paris, stormy seas in the Atlantic, and starlit nights in the Sahara. Each story was a thread in the rich tapestry of the old man's life. And as the city's skyline faded into the distance, Eleanor found herself transported to worlds away. It was then, amid the lull of the moving train and the tales of a life fully lived, that a spark kindled within her, a desire to chase the dreams she had shelved in the dusty corners of her own existence. Tonight, the journey home felt different, as if the tracks she traveled were aligning to lead her not just to her apartment, but towards a destiny reimagined. As the train rolled onward, the tales from the old man, whom Eleanor learned was named Henry, weaved into her thoughts like delicate threads, pulling at the fabric of her own aspirations. Henry spoke of lost love, a woman named Clara, whose laughter was as bright as the summer sun, and whose departure had left an echo in his heart that no passage of time could silence. His eyes shimmered with a blend of nostalgia and sorrow as he recounted their plans that never came to fruition, dreams that had dissolved into the mist of what could have been. Outside, the city had surrendered to the night, its towering structures a silhouette against the starless sky. Inside the train, time seemed to slow, bending around the gravity of Henry's reminiscences. Eleanor felt a kinship with him, a stranger whose stories tugged at her own buried yearnings. He paused, his gaze settling on her with a gentle intensity. "What about you, young lady? What dreams have you deferred in the pursuit of the mundane?" His question, simple yet profound, struck a chord within her. Eleanor hesitated, the weight of unspoken dreams pressing against her lips. She had once aspired to be a writer. She envisioned crafting novels that would whisk readers away to realms both fantastical and true, stories that could stir souls and awaken minds. Yet, life had nudged her onto a more practical path, one of stability and predictability, far away from the whimsical journeys of the imagination she once cherished. "I wanted to write," she confessed, the words feeling both alien and liberating as they escaped into the air. "But it seemed so impractical. I chose a career that offered security." Henry nodded, understandingly. Security is a warm blanket, easy to clutch onto in the cold winds of uncertainty. But sometimes, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper as if imparting a sacred secret. "Sometimes you must throw off the blanket to see the stars more clearly." The train began to slow, its journey nearing its end. The station ahead glowed faintly through the fogged windows. Eleanor knew that when the doors opened, the spell of the night would break, releasing her back into the reality she had momentarily escaped. Yet something within her had shifted, a delicate but irrevocable turn in her heart's compass. As she rose to depart, Henry handed her a small, tattered notebook from his suitcase. "For your stories," he said, a twinkle of encouragement in his tired eyes. Stepping off the train and onto the dimly lit platform, the night air felt different, charged with the possibility of beginnings. Eleanor clutched the notebook close, a treasure chest of blank pages waiting to be filled with the adventures of her own making. The rain had stopped, and in its absence, a path lay open before her, inviting her to tread where she had once dared only to dream. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the familiar hum of the city bustling back to life after the quiet of the night. Yet within her, the silence of routine was disrupted by the echo of Henry's stories and the weight of the notebook resting on her bedside table. As she prepared for her day, her mind replayed the encounter, each memory a spark igniting the kindling of her long-dormant dreams. At work, her usual tasks awaited: emails, meetings, reports, all demanding her attention with the relentless urgency of the immediate. Yet, they seemed strangely muted, as if a veil had been drawn between Eleanor and the mundane realities to which she had long been tethered. The notebook peeked out from her bag, its presence a constant reminder of the night before. Lunchtime found her at her desk, the city's clamor reduced to a distant murmur behind the closed office window. Eleanor opened the notebook. The pages, blank and inviting, seemed to beckon her. With a tentative hand, she penned the first words of what she imagined could one day become a story. The act of writing felt awkward at first, her thoughts stumbling over each other in their rush to be expressed. But soon, the words began to flow more freely, as if they too had been waiting for this release. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's lunch hours became sacred. They were her time to explore the landscapes of her imagination, to construct narratives of characters that had lived only in the quiet corners of her mind. Each story was a small act of rebellion against the life she had settled into, a life chosen by necessity rather than desire. Her colleagues noticed a change in her. There was a new lightness to her step, a spark in her eye previously dimmed by the repetitive glow of computer screens. When asked, she simply smiled, keeping the secret of her newfound passion close to her heart. Writing was her private sanctuary, a world she could shape and control, unlike the unpredictable currents of real life. As her confidence grew, so did her ambition. She started to spend evenings at the library, researching and refining her craft. Books on plot development, character building, and even the mundane mechanics of publishing lined her desk, each one opening doors to knowledge she eagerly absorbed. The decision to submit her first short story to a local magazine came both as a whim and a moment of newfound courage. The magazine was small, its audience limited, but the possibility of seeing her work in print, of sharing her voice with even a handful of readers, was exhilarating. The weeks of waiting for a response were a mix of hope and anxiety, each day stretching longer than the last. Finally, an email arrived, the subject line a simple confirmation that would change her life. Your story has been accepted. The acceptance of her story marked the beginning of a transformation within Eleanor. What was once a timid experiment in self-expression flourished into a passionate pursuit of storytelling. The publication of her first piece gave her the affirmation she needed. She was not just dreaming, she was achieving. Eleanor's evenings and weekends, previously spent in the soft glow of television screens or the idle chatter of casual social gatherings, were now devoted to her writing. Her stories grew in complexity and depth, exploring themes of love, loss, and the courage to embrace change. Each narrative was a patchwork of her observations, woven with the threads of her imagination. The city, with its endless supply of characters and scenarios, served as a constant source of inspiration. Eleanor carried her notebook everywhere, often pausing to scribble down conversations overheard in coffee shops, or the fleeting expressions of strangers that suggested larger, hidden stories. These snippets of everyday life added authenticity to her tales, making them resonate with her growing readership. Her success was gradual but steady. A series of published stories in various magazines led to invitations to write guest columns in literary journals and to participate in writing panels. Each step forward fueled her confidence and ambition. The dream of publishing a full-length novel, once a distant star in her universe, now seemed within reach. Encouraged by her mentors and supported by a community of fellow writers she had met along the way, Eleanor began to outline her first novel. It was to be a reflection of her own journey, of a woman finding her voice in the cacophony of life, inspired by an encounter that shifted her trajectory. The process was daunting, filled with moments of doubt and frustration, but also with incredible bursts of creativity that left her energized, her heart pounding with potential. Meanwhile, the mundane aspects of her day job became increasingly unsatisfactory. The contrast between the fulfillment she found in writing and the emptiness of her office work grew starker each day. After much deliberation, bolstered by a modest advance from a publisher interested in her novel, Eleanor made the decision to leave her job. It was a risk, trading the security of a regular paycheck for the uncertainties of a writing career, but the pull of her passion was too strong to ignore. The day she handed in her resignation was a mix of fear and exhilaration. As she walked out of the office building for the last time, the city seemed to acknowledge her bold choice, its streets alive with the promise of spring. She felt as though she was truly seeing the world for the first time. Every sight and sound a potential story. Every stranger a possible character in the narratives she would create. With a heart full of stories and a mind alive with possibilities, Eleanor stepped into her new life, ready to embrace whatever challenges and triumphs lay ahead. Years later, Eleanor found herself on a stage, the glare of the spotlight a stark contrast to the soft lamplight under which she had penned her countless stories. She stood before an audience in a packed bookstore, her debut novel displayed prominently in the background, its cover catching the gleam of the overhead lights. It was the night of her book launch, a milestone that marked not just the publication of her first novel, but also the culmination of her journey from a dreamer to a celebrated author. As she looked out over the crowd, Eleanor saw faces reflecting admiration and curiosity. Among them were young writers, their eyes bright with their own nascent dreams, and seasoned readers, their expressions open and expectant. The air was thick with anticipation, and as Eleanor began to read aloud from the opening chapter of her book, a hush fell over the room. Her voice, once hesitant and unsure, now carried the strength and nuance of a storyteller confident in her craft. Her novel, The Last Train Home, was a reflection of her own life's turning points, interwoven with the fictional adventures of a protagonist who dared to step off the expected path and chase a long-abandoned dream. It spoke of chance encounters that can alter the course of one's life, much like her own meeting with Henry on that fateful train ride. After the reading, during the question and answer session, a young woman in the audience asked, "What gave you the courage to change your life and pursue writing?" Eleanor paused, her mind traveling back to that rainy night at the subway station. "It was a combination of serendipity and realization," she began, her voice tinged with the wisdom of her experiences. "Meeting someone who had lived so fully in his youth made me reflect on what I was giving up by not following my passion. I realized that fear of failure is a poor reason to abandon dreams. The real failure is never allowing yourself the chance to succeed." The evening ended with applause and a long line of readers eager to have their copies signed. Eleanor met each one with a smile, her pen dancing across the pages with the same joy that filled her when she wrote the stories. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the bookstore lights dimmed, Eleanor stood alone, closing her eyes for a moment in quiet gratitude. She thought of Henry, wherever he might be now, hoping he knew how profoundly he had impacted her life. In her pocket, the tattered notebook he had given her felt like a talisman, a reminder of where her journey had begun. Stepping out into the cool night, Eleanor felt the crisp air invigorate her senses. The city stretched out before her, its lights like scattered stars in a vast, open sky. With a heart full of stories yet to tell and a future unwritten, she walked home, her steps light with the certainty that she had indeed taken the right train that rainy night, one that had delivered her to the destination she was always meant to find.